So the American President Donald Trump has arrived in Hanoi, Vietnam, ahead of that second face-to-face summit with the leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim Jong-Un. He arrived a day earlier after a two-day trip in a bulletproof presidential train. The summit that will focus on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula comes just as South Africa became the 22nd country to deposit its ratification instrument of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. South Africa's envoy to the UN urged member states to follow suit despite headwinds currently being experienced in the non-proliferation area.
Some nuclear weapon states continue to invest billions of dollars in the modernization of nuclear arsenals and their means of delivery, bringing us ever so close to nuclear precipice. In a world where the basic humanitarian needs have not been met, the billions of dollars allocated to the modernization of nuclear weapons could instead be directed towards implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
And we're now on to our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. So, Sherwin, this particular treaty requires, 50 ratifications, but it hasn't really received support from any single nuclear-armed weapon state. Why is that?
And of course, South Africa becoming the 22nd state to ratify SABC. But as you correctly mentioned, no support from the nuclear weapon states because essentially, there's no political will, and given the geopolitical standoffs we see around the world today, by eliminating nuclear weapons, as this treaty would determine, would, in their eyes, weaken their hands. There is a sense among particularly European and American nuclear weapon states that by retaining some sort of nuclear capacity, that serves as a deterrent to some of the bad actors around the world that might want to use these weapons. Essentially, as the argument goes, we won't use them first, but we need them in case they fall into the wrong hands. But also, this is a very complicated space in terms of nuclear non-proliferation. There are a number of treaties. What the Europeans have been arguing is that they want to strengthen the existing nuclear non-proliferation treaty, essentially a treaty that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1968, came into force SABC in 1970, and essentially with the goal of reducing the use of nuclear weapons, the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament. But as the argument goes in terms of the protagonists of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, it has not, since the 1970s, been able to achieve its goals. In addition to that, SABC, we also have what's known as the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, essentially a treaty that would stop the testing of nuclear weapons around the world. This was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1996, but it still hasn't come into force because certain states that must ratify it for it to come into force have not done so. Those states are China, Egypt, Iran, Israel, the United States, North Korea, India, and Pakistan. A number of those are currently nuclear weapon states. A very complicated answer. I hope that made sense.
No, I mean, it's the historical overview of what has happened to bring us to this point. And certainly that'll color the talks that'll take place in Vietnam between Kim Jong-Un and President Donald Trump. So just take us through the next couple of days. What are the tangibles? What are the deliverables that they're hoping for?
Well, they've both arrived, haven't they? The president flying in, Kim Jong-Un deciding to take his bulletproof train. They are now on the ground. They will be, as we understand it, a private dinner between about 6 officials, 2 officials, including President Donald Trump from the White House, 2 additional figures from Kim Jong-un's side. A private dinner. The summit will actually start on Thursday, and you correctly point out, that post the Singapore summit at SABC, so there were some cosmetic agreements in terms of the accords, in terms of the repatriation of the remains of some of America's soldiers that fought in the 1950s Korean War. The United States, in terms of sort of a goodwill measure, decided to scale back its joint military exercises with North Korea, with South Korea, I beg your pardon. And as you correctly point out, there's also been a reduction in the number of nuclear tests in North Korea. So the concern concern here is what will this summit achieve? And I just want to point out that I've dropped the line, if you can just call me back. So what will the tangibles be in terms of moving forward here? It will be a verifiable non-proliferation regime. And who would be able to do that? None other than the International Atomic Energy Agency. And their UN representative, SABC, was speaking to a bunch of students gathered at the UN General Assembly earlier this week. Let's listen to what he had to say about what role the IAEA could play if they reach agreement in Vietnam in the days ahead.
The role of the IAEA, therefore, we foresee that we would be in a position, we think we are the only international organization, in any case, that would be in a position to do the actual verification of the DPRK denuclearization. So we are ready to play this role. We have in our headquarters in Vienna, we have already created a DPRK team, what we refer to as the DPRK team. This is a team of experts who have knowledge of the DPRK nuclear program. Some of them are people who worked in the DPRK before 2009. So they have knowledge. They have also been following the developments in the DPRK over the years, even though we are not physically present. So we are ready. Our Director General has actually said that we would be in a position as the IAEA to go into the DPRK not in weeks, not in months, but in a matter of days. So that is basically our commitment and our state of readiness.
So clearly a very important role for the International Atomic Energy Agency. The representative there in that meeting also made reference to PISO, to their role post the negotiation of the Iran nuclear deal, which is known as the JCPOA. They were not part of the negotiations, but came in afterwards to be able to verify whether Iran was sticking to the agreement. So a very important role that they could play moving forward.
Let's take a look now at other news shown. The UN Security Council meeting today, this day after the US Vice President Mike Pence said that Nicolas Maduro has to vacate his seat. So where is the Council on this particular crisis, and is there agreement, or what exactly is going there now, how to deal with it?
Well, it's the Security Council, so agreement is possibly a very high bar to set, particularly on the question of Venezuela at SABC. So essentially what we have are two Security Council draft resolutions that are being floated in the background, one drafted by the United States that essentially wants the international community to call for free, fair and credible elections in Venezuela. And you have a second draft resolution that was introduced as a counterpoint to the US draft by the Russian Federation. And essentially what the Russian Federation draft is saying is that we need to respect the sovereign integrity, the sovereignty of Venezuela and uphold the UN Charter. So if those drafts were put to a vote, which is unlikely to happen today, they would then, one would assume, bring out the vetoes from the opposing members, essentially the United States and Russia. So essentially today is going to be very much about people restating their positions, trying to coalesce around various positions. It's going to be an interesting division that we will see play itself out in the Council today.
And one that could possibly lead to military intervention, Sherwin. I see that a meeting of the Latin American Lima group of countries has stopped short of that.
That has been the concern, right? I mean, the chaos we saw take place across the border between Venezuela and Brazil, where 4 people were killed, and across the border with Colombia, where they were trying to, where the so-called interim president, Juan Guaido, was trying to bring in convoys of US-sponsored aid. There was a concern that if the military, the Venezuelan military, was too heavy-handed, that there would have been a response from the United States. What the Lima group has now said in their communique after that meeting, as you mentioned, with Mike Pence yesterday, is that they do not want military action, but they certainly want Nicolas Maduro's government to be referred to the International Criminal Court because of his reluctance to bring life-saving aid into the country. So for now, the Lima group is not wanting military intervention, but essentially the majority of their members want free, fair and credible elections in Venezuela, and would like to see the back of Nicolas Maduro.
All right, thanks a lot, Sherwin. We'll leave it there with you too. A majorly important issue issues there, cliffhanger issues, if one would say that, on the talks between U.S. President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-Un on the nuclear weapons and developments in Venezuela. Of course, we'll keep you up to speed on that.